The sound of my father's fist hitting the kitchen table still echoes in my nightmares 13 years later. Dinner's cold, Deborah. My name is Savannah, and I was 15 when I watched my mother flinch at those 3 words like they were bullets. The meatloaf sat there, steam long gone, while Mom's hand shook as she reached for his plate. I'm sorry, Roger. I kept it warm, but nothing. His voice was ice. You had one job. My brothers Samson and Marlowe kept eating like nothing was happening. Fork to mouth, chew, swallow, repeat. They'd perfected the art of invisible during Dad's explosions. Mom stood up too fast, chair scraping against linoleum. I'll heat it up right now. That's when he grabbed her wrist. Sit down. The way he said it made my stomach drop. Mom's face went white, but she sat. Dad picked up a forkful of cold meatloaf, chewed it slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. Tastes like cardboard. He spit it back onto the plate. I watched my mother shrink into herself, shoulders curving inward like she was trying to disappear. 28 years old now, and I can still see every detail of that moment. The way the kitchen light cast shadows under her eyes. How her wedding ring caught the fluorescent glare as she twisted it around her finger. I'm sorry, she whispered. Sorry doesn't fix dinner, does it? That's when his hand moved. Not a slap exactly, more like a sharp tap against her cheek. But the sound it made, skin against skin, filled the entire kitchen. Samson didn't even look up from his plate. I dropped my fork. The clatter made everyone turn toward me, but I only had eyes for Mom. She was staring at her lap, a red mark blooming across her cheek. Something to say, Savannah? Dad's voice carried a warning. I was 15, skinny, powerless. But I looked right at him and said, No, sir. Later that night, I found Mom in the laundry room, folding towels with mechanical precision. Her cheek had faded to pink, but I could still see the outline of his fingers. Mom? She didn't look up. You should be in bed. I stepped closer, lowering my voice to barely a whisper. I'm going to get you out of here someday. Her hand stilled on a blue towel. For a moment, I thought she might cry. Instead, she just nodded once and kept folding. I promise, I whispered. 13 years later, I kept that promise. I built a feminist therapy app called Safe Space from my studio apartment, working 18-hour days while putting myself through law school. The app connected women with trauma-informed therapists, and it exploded. 2 years of blood, sweat, and ramen noodles later, I sold it for $2.8 million. My first purchase wasn't a car or designer clothes. It was a house, not just any house. A 3-bedroom beachfront property with floor-to-ceiling windows and a wraparound deck that faced the ocean. The kind of place Mom used to point out in magazines, saying, someday, maybe. I drove her there on a Tuesday morning in March, telling her we were going to look at a property for a client. She wore her best dress, the navy one with tiny flowers that she saved for church and special occasions. Whose house is this? She asked as we pulled into the circular driveway. Yours. The word hung in the air between us. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Savannah, what do you mean? I pulled the deed from my purse, her name printed in bold letters across the top. I mean, it's yours, Mom. Free and clear. No mortgage, no strings attached. She started crying before we even got out of the car. We spent 2 hours walking through every room, Mom touching everything like she was afraid it might disappear. The kitchen had marble countertops and a gas range that actually worked. The master bedroom had a walk-in closet bigger than her current bedroom. I can't accept this, she kept saying, but her eyes were bright with something I hadn't seen in years. Hope. You already have, I told her. The papers are signed. We were sitting on the deck, watching waves crash against the rocks below, when I heard a car door slam. Mom and I both turned toward the sound. Samson was walking up the front steps like he owned the place. Well, he called out. that familiar smirk spreading across his face. Look what little sister bought. He toured the house without invitation, running his hands along the walls, opening cabinets, testing the faucets. Mom followed behind him, apologizing for things that didn't need apologies. Nice place, he said finally. Real nice. Something in his tone made my skin crawl. As he was leaving, I heard him on his phone in the driveway. His voice carried on the ocean breeze, and what I heard made my blood freeze. We'll get our piece one way or another. 3 weeks later, Marlo showed up at my office unannounced. We need to talk, he said, shifting his weight from foot to foot like he used to do as a kid when he'd broken something. My paralegal Quinn looked up from her desk, eyebrow raised. Should I call security? It's fine, I told her, though every instinct screamed otherwise. What's going on, Marlo? Dad wants to see you. The words hit like a physical blow. Excuse me? He's changed, Savannah. Found God. He wants to make amends with the family. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Make amends? Is that what we're calling it? He's been clean for 2 years. Goes to church every Sunday. He wants to have a family barbecue this weekend. You know, bring everyone together. And Mom agreed to this? Marlo's silence was answer enough. She doesn't know yet, does she? Samson thought it would be better coming from you. Of course he did. Let me be the messenger so when Mom fell apart, I'd be the one holding the pieces. Tell Dad thanks, but no thanks. Savannah, please. He's different now. We could be a real family again. We were never a real family, Marlo. We were a dictatorship with matching DNA. But something in his voice made me pause. Marlo had always been the middle child, caught between Samson's aggression and my rebellion. Maybe he genuinely believed Dad had changed. One barbecue, he said. If it goes badly, we never have to do it again. Against every fiber of my being, I agreed. Saturday arrived gray and drizzly, perfect weather for a family reunion from hell. Mom had been quiet all week since I told her about Dad's invitation. She kept cleaning things that were already clean, a nervous habit from the old days. You don't have to go, I told her as we pulled into Samson's driveway. Yes, I do, she said quietly. If he's really changed. She didn't finish the sentence, but I heard the hope in her voice, the same hope that had kept her married to him for 23 years. Samson's backyard was decorated like a magazine spread. String lights, perfectly arranged patio furniture, a grill that probably cost more than most people's cars. He greeted us at the gate wearing khakis and a polo shirt, looking like a suburban dad from a commercial. There's my successful sister, he said, pulling me into a hug that felt more like a wrestling hold. And beautiful Mom. Mom smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That's when I saw him. Dad stood by the grill, wearing a button-down shirt and slacks instead of his usual stained t-shirt. His hair was combed, his face clean-shaven. He looked almost normal. Deborah, he said, walking toward us with open arms, you look wonderful. Mom froze. I stepped slightly in front of her. Roger, she managed. I know this is awkward, he said, his voice softer than I remembered, but I wanted to thank you, both of you, for giving me this chance. He turned to me. Savannah, I'm proud of what you've accomplished. That app of yours, helping women, it's good work. The words sounded right, but something felt off, like he was reading from a script. Thanks, I said carefully. The barbecue proceeded with forced normalcy. Dad asked about my business, complimented Mom's dress, even helped Marlo's wife with the kids. Every few minutes I caught him and Samson exchanging glances. Then, as we were finishing dessert, Samson stood up. I want to make a toast, he said, raising his beer, to family, to second chances, and to Mom's beautiful new house. Everyone raised their glasses except me. It really is gorgeous, Mom, Samson continued. We drove by last week. That view must be worth a fortune. It's perfect, Mom said quietly. The thing is, Samson said, his tone shifting slightly, we've been talking as a family, and we think it's time to make some changes. My stomach dropped. What kind of changes? I asked. Dad cleared his throat. Well, Savannah, that house represents a lot of money. Family money, in a way. How do you figure that? You wouldn't have been able to build your business without the foundation we gave you, Samson said. The values, the work ethic, the determination. I stared at him. Are you serious right now? We think, Dad continued smoothly, that the house should be in the family name. All of our names. It's about legacy, sweetheart. The word sweetheart in his voice made my skin crawl. We've already talked to a lawyer, Samson added. It's just paperwork. A simple transfer to make it officially a family property. Mom's face had gone pale. But Savannah bought it for me. And that was generous, Dad said. But families share, Deborah. That's what we do. I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila folder I'd been carrying for weeks, just in case. The tab read, Burns Trust in neat block letters. Funny you should mention lawyers, I said, sliding the folder across the table to Mom. I've been talking to some too. Samson's smile faltered. What's that? Open it, Mom. Her hands shook as she lifted the cover. Inside were legal documents, official seals, and a letter with the county courthouse letterhead. What does it say? Dad asked, his voice tight. Mom looked up at Samson, then at Dad, then at me. For the first time in years, she smiled with genuine satisfaction. It says, she announced clearly, that anyone who tries to claim ownership of my house without my written consent will be served with an eviction notice within 24 hours. Samson's face went red. You can't be serious. Dead serious, I said. Mom owns that house. Period. Dad's mask finally slipped. You ungrateful little... Careful, Dad, I interrupted. I'm recording this conversation. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Samson exploded. You're a narcissist, Savannah. Mom owes us that house. Mom took a sip of her wine, set down the glass, and opened the folder wider. Actually, she said quietly, I don't owe you anything. Mom's hands weren't shaking anymore as she pulled out the first document from the folder. This is an eviction notice, she said, her voice steady for the first time all evening. Effective immediately, Roger and Samson are prohibited from entering the property at 1247 Ocean View Drive. Samson's jaw dropped. You can't evict us from a house we don't even live in. Actually, I can, Mom continued, reading from the paper. Any attempt to claim residency, ownership, or legal interest in the property will result in immediate legal action. She looked up at Dad, who had gone completely still. That includes you, Roger. Deborah, honey, let's talk about this reasonably. Don't. The word came out sharp. Don't call me honey. Don't call me anything. I'd never heard my mother use that tone before. Neither had Dad, apparently, because he actually stepped backward. This is insane, Samson said, grabbing for the papers. Let me see that. Mom pulled the folder against her chest. No. Mom, come on. We're family. Family doesn't threaten to steal each other's homes, she replied. Dad's composure was cracking. The soft-spoken, reformed man from earlier was disappearing, replaced by the Roger I remembered from childhood. You're making a mistake, Deborah. Both of you. The only mistake I made, Mom said, standing up from the picnic table, was staying married to you for 23 years. That did it. Dad's face went purple. You think you can just waltz in here with your lawyer daughter and disrespect me? In front of my sons? Your sons? I stood up too. Last I checked, Marlo and I shared the same parents. You stopped being my daughter the day you ran away. I didn't run away, Dad. I escaped. He took a step toward me, and for a second, I was 15 again, watching him grab Mom's wrist. But I wasn't 15 anymore. Go ahead, I said quietly. Put your hands on me. I dare you. My phone was already in my hand, recording. Dad noticed and stopped mid-stride. You're recording this? Every word, every gesture, every threat. I didn't threaten anyone. You just told Mom she was making a mistake for not giving you her house. You stepped toward me in an aggressive manner. You called me disrespectful for protecting my mother's legal rights. Samson was pacing now, running his hands through his hair. This is ridiculous. We're not trying to steal anything. We just want what's fair. What's fair, I said, is that the person whose name is on the deed gets to keep the house. But your name isn't on the deed, Dad said with a smug smile. Is it? He thought he'd caught me in something. Poor guy had no idea how thoroughly I'd prepared for this moment. You're right, I said. My name isn't on the deed. Mom's is. And according to the trust document she's holding, the house can never be transferred, sold, or claimed by anyone without her explicit written consent. Even if something happens to her, it goes to a charitable foundation. Dad's smile vanished. What do you mean, even if something happens to her? I mean, your name isn't on anything, Dad. Not the house, not the trust, not even Mom's emergency contacts anymore. The silence stretched for what felt like hours. Marlowe's wife was corralling the kids inside, clearly sensing the tension. Marlowe himself looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. You can't do this, Samson said finally. It's already done. We'll fight it in court. With what money? I asked. Do you have $50,000 for legal fees? Because that's what it'll cost to challenge a properly executed trust. Samson's face went white. Apparently, he didn't have $50,000. Dad, meanwhile, was building toward an explosion. I could see it in the way his hands were clenching and unclenching, the way his breathing was getting shallow. You think you're so smart, he said, his voice getting louder. You think your fancy law degree makes you better than us? I think my fancy law degree makes me better prepared than you. You're nothing, he shouted. You hear me? Nothing. You wouldn't even exist without me. Roger, stop, Mom said, but he was past hearing her. I gave you life. I put a roof over your head. I fed you, clothed you, and this is how you repay me? You want to talk about repayment? I asked, my voice deadly calm. Let's talk about the hospital bills from when you broke Mom's wrist. Let's talk about the therapy sessions she needed after you convinced her she was worthless. Let's talk about the years of my life I spent afraid to come home from school because I didn't know what mood you'd be in. I never broke her wrist. Saint. Mary's Hospital, March 15th, 2010. I have the records. His mouth opened and closed like a fish. You want to know what's really funny, Dad? You think you have some claim to that house because you're the man of the family. But legally speaking, you don't exist in Mom's life anymore. I made sure of that. What do you mean? Mom reached into the folder one more time and pulled out a document with official seals and ribbons. Divorce papers, she said quietly. Filed yesterday. Served today. She handed him the document with steady hands. You have 30 days to respond. Dad stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. Deborah, you can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. For the first time since I'd known him, my father had absolutely nothing to say. Monday morning, I spread everything across the conference table in my office like evidence in a murder trial. Text messages, voicemails, emails, 3 years' worth of documentation. Quinn whistled low as she looked through the pile. Jesus, Savannah, you've been collecting this stuff for how long? Since I bought Mom the house, I had a feeling they'd try something. My mentor, Elena, picked up a printed email from Samson. Listen to this gem. Mom's getting too comfortable in that house. We need to remind her where her loyalties should be. That's from last month, I said. Right after she started going to therapy. Elena flipped through more messages. Here's your dad. Savannah thinks she can buy her way out of family obligations. We'll see about that. And this voicemail, Quinn added, hitting play on her phone. Dad's voice filled the room, slurred and angry. You turned my wife against me, you ungrateful bitch. There will be consequences. Elena looked up sharply. When was this? 2 nights ago. Around midnight. He was drunk? Sounds like it. Elena made notes on her legal pad. This is harassment, possibly intimidation. We can get a restraining order based on this alone. That's what I was thinking. Quinn was still scrolling through messages on my phone. Oh, this is Rich. Samson texted you yesterday. Family meeting tonight. Your presence is required. Required? Who does he think he is? The head of the family, apparently. Well, he's about to find out how wrong he is, Elena said, organizing the documents into neat piles. I'll file for the restraining order this afternoon. We should also... A knock on the door interrupted her. Quinn looked through the glass. It's Marlowe, she said. Alone. Let him in. Marlowe entered looking like he hadn't slept in days. His usual neat appearance was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled. We need to talk, he said. If this is about the family meeting Samson demanded, it's not. He glanced at Quinn and Elena. Can we have some privacy? They're my legal team. Whatever you have to say, they can hear. Marlowe shifted uncomfortably. Okay, but what I'm about to tell you could get me in serious trouble. Elena leaned forward. What kind of trouble? The legal kind. He took a deep breath. Samson's been using Dad's name to take out business loans, forging his signature. The room went dead silent. How do you know this? I asked. Because he asked me to notarize some documents last year. I didn't think much of it at the time, but when I looked closer, he pulled a folded paper from his jacket. This is a copy of a loan application for his construction company, $200,000. Elena took the document, studying it carefully. This signature doesn't match the one on your parents' marriage certificate. That's because Samson signed it, Marlowe said. I watched him practice Dad's signature for an hour before he filled out the paperwork. Quinn was already pulling up information on her laptop. Burns Construction LLC, incorporated 2 years ago. Multiple outstanding loans. Her eyes widened. Holy shit. Sorry, holy crap. He owes almost $500,000. And it's all in Dad's name, Marlowe continued. Dad doesn't even know about it. Why are you telling us this? I asked. Marlowe looked miserable. Because I'm scared of what Samson might do next. After yesterday's barbecue, he was furious. He kept talking about how you and Mom humiliated him, how he wasn't going to let some uppity women destroy the family. He said that, those exact words, and then he started talking about the house again. How it should belong to all of us, how he was going to find a way to get his share. Elena was making rapid notes. This changes everything. If Samson's been committing fraud, using your father's identity, we can... My phone buzzed with a bank alert. I glanced at the screen and felt my blood run cold. Someone just tried to file a claim against Mom's house, I said, reading the notification. They're trying to reclassify it as joint family property. Can they do that? Quinn asked. Not legally, Elena said, but they can tie it up in court for months while we fight it. Marlowe's face went pale. Samson said he had a lawyer friend who owed him a favor. I was already dialing my phone. Mom, are you okay? Good. Don't leave the house. Don't let anyone in. I don't care if it's the Pope. No one gets inside without me there. I'll explain later. I hung up and turned to Elena. How fast can we move on this? If we file an emergency motion today, we can freeze any attempts to alter the property status. But Savannah, if they're willing to commit fraud over this house... They might try something more direct, I finished. Marlowe nodded grimly. Samson's been talking to some of his construction guys. Rough types. He mentioned something about handling the situation personally if the legal route didn't work. Are you saying he's threatening violence? I'm saying my brother isn't thinking clearly right now. He sees that house as his ticket out of debt, and he's not going to let anything stop him from getting it. Quinn was already packing up her laptop. I'm calling the police. Wait, Elena said. We need to be strategic about this. If we move too fast, we might spook them into doing something stupid. And if we move too slow, they might hurt Mom. Another alert popped up on my phone. This time it was a text message from an unknown number. Your mother is living in a house that doesn't belong to her. Fix this or we will. I showed the message to Elena. That's it, she said, standing up. We're filing everything today. Restraining order, fraud charges, emergency property protection. All of it. What about Mom's safety? I'm calling a friend at the sheriff's department. They can do extra patrols around the house while we get the legal protections in place. Marlowe was staring at his hands. I should have said something sooner. You're saying something now, I told him. That's what matters. Samson's going to know it came from me. Then maybe it's time you stopped being afraid of your big brother. He looked up at me with something that might have been respect. You're right, he said. I'm tired of being scared. My phone rang. It was Mom. Savannah, there's a sheriff's car in my driveway. Mom, that's good news, I said, grabbing my keys. I called them. They're there to protect you. Protect me from what? I'll explain when I get there. Don't open the door for anyone except me or the police. I made it to Mom's house in 20 minutes, breaking several speed limits. The sheriff's deputy was talking to her on the front porch when I pulled up. Ms. Burns. The deputy extended his hand. Deputy Martinez. We spoke on the phone. Thank you for coming so quickly. Your mother was just telling me about some family disputes over the property. Mom looked confused. Savannah, what's going on? I showed her the threatening text message. Her face went white. Who sent this? We don't know yet. But given everything that happened yesterday, Deputy Martinez was reading over my shoulder. This constitutes a credible threat. We'll increase patrols in the area, but I'd recommend you both stay somewhere else tonight. I'm not leaving my house, Mom said firmly. Mom, no Savannah. I spent 23 years being afraid in my own home. I won't do it again. Deputy Martinez nodded approvingly. We can post someone here overnight if needed. But ma'am, if you see anything suspicious, call 911 immediately. After he left, Mom and I sat on her deck watching the waves. She was quiet for a long time. I filed the restraining order today, I said finally, against your father and Samson. They can't come within 500 feet of you or this house. She sipped her tea, processing this. What happens now? Now we wait and see if they're smart enough to back off. They weren't. The next morning, Elena called with news. The emergency motion worked. The property is frozen from any ownership changes. But Savannah, there's something else. What? Samson filed a counterclaim. He's alleging that your mother is mentally incompetent and that you coerced her into signing the trust documents. I felt like I'd been punched. He's claiming Mom has dementia? Essentially, yes. He's requesting a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation. That's insane. Mom is sharper than most people half her age. I know. But we'll need to prove that. I've already scheduled an evaluation with Dr. Patricia Williams. She's court-approved and specializes in elder competency cases. How long will this take? A few weeks for the full evaluation. But Savannah, there's more. Samson's lawyer is also claiming that the house purchase was made with funds obtained through elder abuse. Elder abuse? I bought my mother a house. They're saying you manipulated her emotional state to gain control of her finances. I was pacing now, furious. This is unbelievable. It gets worse. They filed a motion to freeze your assets pending investigation. They can't do that. They can try. We'll fight it, but this is going to get ugly. That afternoon, I was leaving the courthouse when I spotted a familiar figure across the street. Samson was standing next to a black pickup truck talking on his phone. When he saw me, he ended the call and walked over. "Restraining order, huh?" he said, stopping just outside the 500-foot boundary. "Real mature, sis." "It's 500 feet, Samson. You're too close. I'm on a public sidewalk. I have rights, too. What do you want?" "I want you to drop this nonsense and give Mom back her dignity." "Her dignity? You've turned her into a laughingstock. The whole neighborhood is talking about how her daughter had to swoop in and save her like she's some helpless victim. She was a victim of Dad, of you, of this whole toxic family. That's your version of the story. That's the truth." Samson stepped closer, right to the edge of the legal boundary. "Here's my truth. You abandoned this family when things got tough. You ran away and left the rest of us to deal with Dad's drinking, Mom's depression, all of it. And now you waltz back in with your money and your lawyers, acting like you're the hero. I was 17, Samson. I was a kid. You were selfish, and you still are." A small crowd was starting to gather, people with phones out, clearly recording. Samson noticed and raised his voice. "Look at her," he shouted to the crowd. "This is what happens when feminists get money. They turn against their own families. Samson, stop. She bought our mother a house just to control her. She's isolated her from her husband, her sons, everyone who actually cares about her." More phones came out. Someone was live streaming on social media. "You want to know the truth?" Samson continued, playing to his audience now. "My sister is a fake feminist who uses her success to manipulate vulnerable women. She built her whole business on lies." That's when I realized what he was doing. This wasn't just a family argument anymore. He was trying to destroy my reputation publicly. "Are you done?" I asked calmly. "I'm just getting started." "Good, because everything you just said is being recorded by about 20 people, and it's all going straight to my lawyer as evidence of harassment and defamation." Samson's confident expression faltered slightly. "You want to play this game in public?" I continued, my voice carrying clearly to the crowd. "Let's play. Tell them about the forged loan documents. Tell them about the $500,000 in debt you racked up using Dad's identity." Now he looked genuinely worried. "Tell them about the threatening text messages. Tell them about how you tried to steal a house from a domestic abuse survivor." The crowd was murmuring now, phones still recording, but the mood had shifted. "You're lying," Samson said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I? Because I have documentation for everything I just said." "Do you?" He turned and walked back to his truck without another word. That evening, the video was everywhere. Our fake family was trending on Twitter. The comments were brutal, but they weren't directed at me. "This guy is trash. Imagine trying to steal your mom's house. The sister handled that perfectly. Quinn called me laughing. Have you seen the internet today? You're a viral hero. I didn't want to be a viral anything. Too late." Someone found Samson's business license and posted all his outstanding debts online. His company is getting review bombed. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You think you won? This isn't over." I screenshot it and sent it to Elena. Her response was immediate. "That's violation of the restraining order." "I'm calling the sheriff." Elena burst into my office the next morning, carrying a banker's box and wearing the kind of smile that meant someone was about to get destroyed in court. "You're going to love this," she said, dropping the box on my desk with a satisfying thud. "What is it?" "Remember how I mentioned I used to work with a lawyer who handled some Burns family business years ago?" Quinn looked up from her computer. "The one who retired?" "That's the one." "Margaret Chen. Sorry, Margaret Williams. She kept meticulous records. Elena pulled out a thick file, including a will your father had drawn up 2 years ago. My stomach dropped. What kind of will? The kind that leaves everything to Samson and cuts you and your mother out completely. That's not legal. You can't just disinherit your spouse. Actually, you can in this state. But here's the beautiful part. Elena opened the file with a flourish. The will is completely invalid. How? Your father forged the witness signatures. Margaret has the original documents showing the real witnesses never signed anything. Plus, he backdated it to make it look like it was executed before your parents separated. Quinn whistled. So if Mom hadn't divorced him, she would have been homeless when he died, I finished. He was planning to screw her over from beyond the grave. Elena nodded grimly. Gets worse. According to these documents, he was also planning to contest the house purchase, claiming your mother was mentally incompetent when she accepted it. The same argument Samson is using now. Exactly. This was all coordinated. My phone rang. It was Mom. Savannah, there's a woman here from the court. She says she needs to evaluate me. That's Dr. Williams. I'll be right there. Wait, Elena said. Before you go, there's more. Margaret also found financial records for Samson's business. The fraud goes deeper than we thought. She pulled out bank statements and loan documents. He didn't just forge your father's signature. He's been using your father's social security number to open credit accounts. Your dad's credit is completely destroyed. Does Dad know? Based on these collection notices, he's starting to figure it out. Look at this. Elena showed me a letter addressed to Roger at Samson's business address. It was from a collections agency demanding payment on a $75,000 credit card debt. This is from last week, I said, reading the date. And this is from yesterday. She handed me another letter. Same debt, but now they're threatening legal action. Quinn was pulling up more information on her computer. Oh my God. Samson's business partner Jeremy just filed for bankruptcy. He's listing Burns Construction as a creditor for over $200,000. Jeremy's throwing Samson under the bus? Looks like it. And get this, Jeremy's bankruptcy filing includes a sworn statement that he was unaware the business loans were obtained fraudulently. Elena grinned. He's trying to save himself by implicating Samson. This is perfect. We can use Jeremy's statement to... My phone rang again. This time it was an unknown number. Savannah? This is Jeremy Scott. We need to talk. I put the call on speaker. I'm listening. I just found out what Samson's been doing with those loans. I had no idea he was using your father's information. So you're saying you're innocent? I'm saying I was lied to, and now my business is ruined because of it. Elena leaned toward the phone. This is Elena Sullivan, Ms. Burns' attorney. Are you willing to testify about Mr. Samson's fraudulent activities? If it keeps me out of prison, yes. We'll need a sworn statement. You'll have it today. But there's something else you need to know. Samson's planning something big. He's been talking to some guys about taking care of the problem permanently. My blood went cold. What kind of guys? The kind who don't ask questions if the price is right. Elena was already reaching for her phone. We need to call the police. Wait, Jeremy continued. There's more. Samson showed me a copy of your father's will. He thinks when your dad dies, he'll inherit everything and can force your mother out of the house. The will's invalid, I said. Samson doesn't know that. He's been counting on that money to pay off his debts. When he finds out it's not coming, he'll get desperate, Elena finished. After Jeremy hung up, we sat in silence for a moment. We need to move fast, Elena said finally. I'm filing fraud charges against Samson today. And I'm requesting immediate asset seizure on his business accounts. What about Mom's safety? I'm calling Sheriff Martinez. They need to know about the threat. Quinn was already typing. I'm also sending all of this to the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. Wire fraud across state lines is federal. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. The doctor seems very nice. She says I'm perfectly competent. Also, there's a sheriff's car outside again. I was typing back when Elena's phone rang. Elena Sullivan. What? When? We'll be right there. She hung up, her face grim. That was the courthouse. Someone just tried to file an emergency motion claiming your mother is being held against her will. Who filed it? Your father. He's claiming you've kidnapped her and are forcing her to stay in the house. Quinn looked up from her computer. There's something else. A sheriff's deputy just served papers at Sampson's house. What kind of papers? Asset seizure notice. They're freezing all of Burns Construction's accounts pending fraud investigation. My phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I recognized the voice immediately. You've made a very big mistake, Sampson said, his voice shaking with rage. Have I? You think you can destroy my life and get away with it? I think you destroyed your own life when you decided to commit fraud. This isn't over, Savannah. Not even close. The line went dead. Elena was already dialing. Sheriff Martinez? We have a problem. The courtroom was packed. Word had gotten out about the viral family feud, and reporters filled the back rows. Mom sat beside me in her best navy dress, the same one she'd worn to see the house for the first time. Judge Patricia Hernandez called the session to order. We're here today regarding multiple motions in the matter of Burns family trust dispute and related fraud allegations. Sampson's lawyer, a tired-looking man in an ill-fitting suit, stood first. Your Honor, my client maintains that the trust was created under duress and that Mrs. Deborah Burns lacks the mental capacity to— Objection, Elena interrupted smoothly. Mrs. Burns underwent a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation just 3 days ago. Dr. Williams found her to be fully competent. Judge Hernandez nodded. I have Dr. Williams' report. Mrs. Burns shows no signs of cognitive impairment or mental incompetence. Motion dismissed. Sampson's face went red. He whispered something harsh to his lawyer. Furthermore, Elena continued, we have evidence that Mr. Sampson Burns has been systematically defrauding financial institutions using his father's identity. She approached the bench with a stack of documents, bank records, loan applications, and witness testimony showing a pattern of forgery and identity theft spanning 2 years. The judge reviewed the papers while Sampson's lawyer shuffled through his notes frantically. Your Honor, the lawyer said, these allegations are documented extensively, Elena cut him off. We also have a sworn statement from Mr. Jeremy Scott, Mr. Sampson's business partner, detailing his knowledge of these fraudulent activities. Judge Hernandez looked up sharply. Mr. Scott is cooperating with this investigation? Yes, Your Honor. In exchange for immunity, he's provided detailed records of how the fraudulent loans were obtained and used. I glanced back at Sampson. He was staring at his hands, jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. Additionally, Elena said, we have evidence that Mr. Roger Burns created a fraudulent will intended to disinherit his wife using forged witness signatures. She presented more documents. The original attorney's files show the witnesses never signed the document. Mr. Burns also backdated the will to circumvent divorce proceedings. This is ridiculous, Dad shouted from the gallery. I have every right to— Mr. Burns, Judge Hernandez said sharply, you will remain silent or be removed from my courtroom. Elena wasn't finished. Your Honor, we also have recorded evidence of threats made against Mrs. Deborah Burns and her daughter. She played the voicemail from Dad, his drunken voice filling the courtroom. You turned my wife against me, you ungrateful bitch. There will be consequences. The judge's expression darkened. Mr. Burns approached the bench. Dad shuffled forward, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. Sir, you are in violation of an active restraining order. Bailiff, please place Mr. Burns under arrest. Wait, Dad protested as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. This is my family. I have rights. You forfeited those rights when you chose to commit fraud and make threats, Judge Hernandez replied coldly. As Dad was led away, Sampson stood up abruptly. This is insane. You're destroying our family over money. Mr. Sampson Burns, the judge said, you're also under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. Two more officers moved toward Sampson. His lawyer tried to intervene. Your Honor, my client is willing to cooperate. Your client has been systematically stealing from financial institutions for 2 years, Elena said. The FBI has taken over the investigation. This is now a federal case. Sampson's legs seemed to give out. He collapsed back into his chair as the officers approached. I was trying to save the family business, he said desperately. Everything I did was for the family. You did it for yourself, I said, standing up. You never cared about family. You cared about control. Savannah, please. No. My voice carried clearly through the courtroom. You spent years watching Dad abuse Mom and did nothing. You tried to steal her house. You threatened us both. And when that didn't work, you committed federal crimes. The officers were putting handcuffs on Sampson now. He looked at me with pure hatred. This isn't over, he said. Yes, it is. Judge Hernandez banged her gavel. Mr. Sampson Burns, you're remanded to federal custody pending trial. Bail is set at $500,000. Sampson's lawyer winced. Your Honor, my client doesn't have, then he'll remain in custody. As Sampson was led away, he turned back one more time. Mom, please, don't let her do this to me. Mom stood up slowly. For a moment, I thought she might actually defend him. Instead, she said quietly, You did this to yourself, son. After the courtroom cleared, Mom and I sat on a bench outside. She was quiet for a long time, watching people walk by. I keep thinking I should feel sad, she said finally. It's okay if you do, but I don't. I feel free. She turned to me with tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. For the first time in my adult life, I'm not afraid of anyone. What do you want to do now? Mom pulled out her phone and showed me a travel website. I want to go to Florence. I've always wanted to see the art museums there. That sounds perfect. I already booked the trip. 2 weeks in Italy. She paused. I booked 2 tickets. Mom, I can't just drop everything and you need a break too, honey. Let karma drive for a while. I looked at the courthouse behind us, then at my mother's hopeful face. When do we leave? Tomorrow. I laughed despite everything. Tomorrow? I've waited 53 years to live my own life, Savannah. I'm not waiting another day. The letter arrived at my office on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after we returned from Florence. Quinn dropped it on my desk with a disgusted expression. It's from Sampson, she said. Hart prison mail. I stared at the envelope for a long moment before opening it. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. Savannah, it began, I hope you're satisfied. You've destroyed everything our family built. Dad's in county jail. I'm facing 20 years federal time, and Mom won't even take my calls. I stopped reading after the first paragraph. Same old Sampson. Everyone else's fault, never his own. Want me to file it with the others? Quinn asked. Others? He's written you 6 letters. I've been screening them. They're all the same. Blame, guilt trips, no actual apology. I dropped the letter in the trash without finishing it. Any word from the FBI? Jeremy's cooperation got him a plea deal. 2 years probation. Sampson's lawyer is trying to negotiate, but with the federal charges... Quinn shrugged. He's looking at serious time. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Burns Construction assets seized in federal fraud case. The article included a photo of Sampson's office building with FBI tape across the doors. The schadenfreude is real, Quinn said, reading over my shoulder. I don't feel good about it, I said. And I meant it. I just wanted Mom to be safe. You wanted justice. There's a difference. Elena knocked on the doorframe. Got a minute? There's been a development. She sat down across from my desk, looking unusually serious. Roger's lawyer called. He wants to make a deal. What kind of deal? Full confession to the will fraud in exchange for reduced charges. He's also willing to sign over any remaining claims to marital property. What's the catch? He wants to see Deborah. One last conversation. I felt my jaw clench. Absolutely not. I told his lawyer the same thing. But Savannah, your mother might want to hear this. Hear what? More manipulation? More lies? Maybe. Or maybe she needs closure. I called Mom immediately. He wants to see me? She asked. Elena thinks it might help with the legal proceedings. But Mom, you don't owe him anything. There was a long pause. Where would this meeting happen? The jail, with lawyers present. You'd be completely safe. I'll do it. Mom, I need to look him in the eye one more time. I need him to see who I am now. The county jail visiting room smelled like disinfectant and despair. Dad sat across from us in an orange jumpsuit, looking older than his 55 years. His hands were cuffed to the table. Mom walked in wearing a white sundress and the confidence she'd found in Florence. She looked radiant. Dad's face crumpled when he saw her. Deborah, thank God. I was hoping. I'm not here for you, Roger, she said, sitting down calmly. I'm here for me. His mouth opened and closed like a fish. I spent 23 years afraid of you, Mom continued. Afraid of your anger, your fists, your threats? Do you know what I'm afraid of now? Dad shook his head. Nothing. I'm afraid of absolutely nothing. Deborah, please. I know I made mistakes. Mistakes? Her voice stayed level, but there was steel underneath. You hit me. You terrorized our children. You tried to steal my house. You forged legal documents to leave me homeless. I was trying to protect the family assets. You were trying to control me even after death. Dad looked at his lawyer desperately. Can't you make her understand? Understand what? Mom asked. That you're sorry? That you've changed? That if I just give you one more chance, things will be different? Yes, Mom smiled, but it wasn't kind. I don't care. The words hit Dad like a physical blow. I don't care if you're sorry, she continued. I don't care if you found God. I don't care if you spend the rest of your life in prison or get out tomorrow. You have no power over me anymore. She stood up. Sign the papers, Roger. Give up your claims to everything. Because whether you do or not, I'm free. Dad was crying now, ugly sobs that shook his whole body. Please don't leave me with nothing. You left yourself with nothing, Mom said. The day you chose violence over love. She walked out without looking back. That evening, Mom and I sat on her deck watching the sunset paint the ocean gold and pink. She was sipping wine and reading a travel magazine. Where to next? I asked. I'm thinking Greece, or maybe Morocco. Sounds amazing. She set down the magazine and looked at me seriously. What about you, sweetheart? What do you want to do now? I considered the question. For so long, my life had been about escaping, then building, then protecting. Now, for the first time, I could just be. I think I want to help other women do what you did. Leave abusive marriages? Find their voices. I'm thinking about starting a legal aid foundation, free representation for women trying to escape domestic abuse. Mom's eyes lit up. That's perfect. My phone was face down on the table, notifications turned off. The ocean crashed against the rocks below, steady and eternal. In the distance, a pelican dove for fish. You know what the best part is? Mom said. What? The quiet. No one's yelling. No one's threatening. No one's demanding anything from us. She was right. The silence wasn't empty. It was full, full of possibility, of peace, of a future we got to choose. I raised my wine glass. To the quiet ones, Mom clinked her glass against mine. To the quiet ones who learned to roar. We sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared into the horizon, two women who had finally found their voices by learning when not to use them. The ocean kept its rhythm, and for the first time in my life, so did I.
My name is Elena Prescott. I've always been the kind of person who checks the return address before opening a box. Just a quiet habit, not paranoia. But the morning that plain brown package arrived on my birthday, I didn't even reach for it. My husband Graham got to the door first. He stared at it long and hard, then said just loud enough for me to hear, "Don't open it." I thought he was joking. The label looked normal until it didn't. No handwriting, no return name, just a printed tag and a P.O. box from somewhere we'd never lived. He didn't explain, just tapped one corner of the box with a single finger. "Look closer." So I did. And my stomach dropped before I even knew why. I didn't touch it again. Instead, I set the kettle on the stove quietly. Graham stood in the doorway watching me. 30 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Not a neighbor, not Amazon, a uniform. And suddenly, everything that came before the silence, the strained phone calls, the way my mother said "sweetheart" like it tasted foreign in her mouth, made brutal, perfect sense. That box wasn't a gift. It was an ending. Or maybe a beginning. I'm not someone who makes a big deal out of birthdays. No decorations, no Instagram posts with champagne and hashtags. Most years, I forget it's even coming until Graham surprises me with a chocolate croissant and some bad joke about aging gracefully. That morning was just like that. The coffee was warm, the house was quiet, and for once my inbox wasn't yelling at me. Then the doorbell rang. I assumed it was the mail. Graham had ordered some garden shears and forgot to change the delivery address. But when he walked back in, holding a cardboard box, something shifted in the room. He didn't smile. He didn't even speak at first. He just set it down on the counter and looked at me like the thing might start ticking. "That's from them," I said, already knowing. He nodded once. Not surprised, not curious, just wary. The box sat there between us. Medium-sized, taped down so precisely, it looked machine-sealed. No gift wrap, no tag. Just that cold little label. I stepped closer, almost on instinct, and that's when he said it. "Don't open it." I blinked at him, half laughing. "Why you think it's cursed?" But he wasn't laughing. He pointed at the barcode, not touching it, just hovering his hand a few inches above. His voice dropped. "Look at the spacing, the font." That's when it clicked. It wasn't that I recognized the box itself. It was that I'd seen its twin, its entire family stacked in Delia's apartment the last time we'd been there. Same packaging, same supplier. She'd waved me off when I asked about them. Strict inventory system, she'd said, "Don't touch." And now one had landed on my kitchen counter. On my birthday. With my name on it. I didn't move. I didn't ask questions. Graham didn't push. He just turned off the burner under the kettle and stood beside me in silence, the way people do when something's already wrong, and saying it out loud would make it worse. The memory of that last lunch with Delia and my mother snapped into place like a trap springing shut. They'd wanted to use my name for a business license. Just temporary, they said, just paperwork. I said no, I didn't explain. I just said it plainly and once. After that, the calls slowed, then stopped. They didn't yell, they froze me out. And now here it was, a package I never asked for, tied up in silence, dressed like a gift. I didn't open it. I sat down instead, folded my hands on the kitchen table, and waited. Graham made tea. The box stayed on the counter untouched. But whatever was inside, whatever they sent, I already knew one thing for sure. It wasn't for me. It was for what they needed me to be. It started with a lunch invitation that felt more like a summons. My mother called out of nowhere one Thursday last spring. Her voice was too light, too bright, like she'd just won something and couldn't wait to act casual about it. "Let's grab lunch," she said. "Just us girls." I paused, then asked, "Is Delia coming?" She giggled, a sound I hadn't heard since middle school, and said she's already got a table. That should have been my first warning. The place was one of those farm-to-table cafes, with a 4-syllable name and menu items like beetroot foam. Delia was already seated when I arrived, sipping a green drink that looked like something strained from a fish tank. She wore oversized sunglasses indoors and waved like we were still in high school, like nothing between us had ever cracked. I sat down, carefully folded my napkin once. My mother complimented my scarf, she never does that, and they both smiled too long before easing into pleasantries. Then came the moment. So Delia said, stirring her drink like it needed help, "I was wondering if I could maybe use your name and address for a little business thing." Just like that. She didn't even dress it up. No long backstory, no build-up. Just a thing. A little thing. And me so stable. That was her word. It always had the same meaning in our family. The boring one. The reliable one. The one who paid taxes on time and didn't cry at brunch. I looked at her, then at my mother. She nodded like this all made perfect sense. "It's just temporary," she said. "You're good with forms. She's just between apartments." I didn't yell, I didn't scold, I didn't ask why she couldn't use her own name. I just said no. That was the only moment of clarity in the entire meal. Delia's smile froze. "Oh, okay. Well, that's fine," she said too quickly. She glanced at my mother, who avoided eye contact by adjusting her napkin, as if it were about to burst into flames. The lunch ended early. I paid for my own salad. Neither of them offered. After that, the thaw never came. Messages turned into silence. Christmas passed without a text. My father sent a single-line email in January that read, "Sad to see you can't support your sister's dreams." Delia blocked me on social media. I wouldn't have known if a mutual friend hadn't sent me a screenshot. I told myself I didn't care. But some nights I'd stare at the screen hovering over their numbers, wondering if I should just call. Just once. Just to see if they noticed I was gone. But they hadn't. Not really. So when the box arrived on my birthday, when I saw that slick, calculated packaging, the kind Delia used to handle like sacred cargo, I knew it wasn't kindness. They weren't sending me a gift. They were sending me a role to play. And this time, they were counting on me to say yes without even looking inside. The box stayed where it was centered on the kitchen counter, like some kind of relic. I didn't move it, didn't touch it. Graham didn't ask again. He just made tea the way he always does, when I go quiet in that specific way, the way that means I'm not deciding I'm watching. We sat there in silence for a long time. Then I reached for my phone. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call Delia. I called the local non-emergency police line, the one they print on the city website, but no one actually expects you to use. I told the dispatcher a package had arrived from a sender I didn't recognize. I didn't use the word suspicious. I just said I think you might want to take a look. 30 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. 2 officers, calm, neutral, professional in the way only trained detachment can be. One held a clipboard. The other nodded at me like we were neighbors who'd never quite spoken. "Are you Elena Prescott?" I nodded. "We received a report about a package delivered to this address. Would you mind if we come in and take a look?" I stepped back without saying a word. Graham appeared at my side, hands in his pockets, not tense, but ready. The officers walked in, eyes scanning the room like they were reading the dust. One approached the box slowly, like it might blink. "Is this the one?" "Yes." "Have you opened it?" "No." "Do you know who sent it?" I hesitated, then said yes. But not really. They exchanged a look, small but practiced. One of them pulled on gloves. The other took photos. The blade of a box cutter slid out with a quiet click. They opened it carefully, slicing the tape with deliberate precision. Inside bubble wrap, fragile tags, several small figurines nestled in decorative packaging. An envelope, a certificate, a shipping slip. My name on all of it. No return sender. Just me. One officer scanned a QR code on the base of a figurine. His brow furrowed. He leaned in toward his partner and whispered something too soft to catch. Then he turned back toward me. "Do you know what these are, Art?" "I guess," I said. "Do you know where they came from?" "My parents said it was a gift." He paused. "Do you have proof of that?" I nodded once and reached for my phone. Scrolled. Hit play. My mother's voice filled the room, too sweet, too bright. "Did you get our little gift? We just wanted to show you how much we love you. You're our girl." That was all I needed. I hit stop. The officer exhaled slowly, nodding. We're going to take this with us. You're not being charged at this time. But this shipment matches materials involved in an active investigation. I didn't ask what kind. I didn't need to. They resealed the box like it was evidence in a crime scene, which I suppose it was. When they left, Graham followed them out. I just sat there, hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of tea. The box was gone. But the silence it left behind, that felt louder than anything. The next morning, I was halfway through a bowl of cereal when the phone rang again. Unknown number. I let it buzz twice before picking up. Elena Prescott, a man's voice asked. Yes, this is Detective Mark Finley, Financial Crimes Division. Do you have a moment? My spoon froze midair. For what? We need to confirm a few things regarding your name and its use in a case we're currently pursuing. I set the spoon down. Go ahead. Have you ever registered a business under your name involving art distribution, international supply chains, or resale platforms? I almost laughed. No. I once sold a bookshelf on Facebook Marketplace. That's the full extent of my commerce career. He didn't laugh, not even politely. Have you ever used the email address prescottdesignssketchyart.com? No. Have you ever authorized anyone to use your digital signature for contract agreements? No. There was a pause. Then we found a signature your name, but not your handwriting. Would you be willing to take a look? He emailed it while we were still on the call. I opened the file. One glance was enough. It looked like someone had glanced at my birthday card signature once and tried to trace it from memory. I told him that's not mine. We suspected as much. We've also found purchase orders and tax filings associated with a business that lists your old home address as the return center. The digital trail points to a device connected to Delia Prescott. My breath hitched. He continued. You've technically been listed as a silent partner in this business for over a year. Of course I had. I didn't ask what that meant for me. I already knew. If they hadn't opened the box at my house, if I'd opened it or even touched it, this story could have had a very different ending. I agreed to provide a formal statement. That afternoon, I emailed a notarized letter, denying any involvement, and included a photo of my actual signature. Before hitting send, I stared at the PDF on my screen for a long time. Not because I doubted the facts, but because some part of me still didn't want to believe it had come to this. I used to hand my mother my W-2s to review during tax season. I used to leave my passport in her filing cabinet for safekeeping. There was a time I thought love meant sharing everything. Documents, passwords, vulnerability. That was the last time I thought that. Past tense and final. Detective Finley thanked me for my cooperation. He didn't say what would happen next. Didn't mention charges or arrests, or even Delia's name again. He just said, "We'll be in touch," and hung up. And for the first time in weeks, the silence that followed didn't feel like punishment. It felt like space, like something had been carved out, something I could finally step away from. The call came 3 days later. No caller ID, but I didn't need one. I recognized the silence before her voice even landed. How could you? Not a question, not even anger really. Just a line tossed like a rope she expected me to catch and tie around my own throat. I didn't say anything. You told the police it was Delia's. Her voice cracked not with sadness, but with betrayal that didn't belong to her. I told them who sent the package, I replied. You? You called me. You asked if it arrived. You said it was a gift. You know what this means for her. Yes, I said. A pause. Then something colder. You could have said it was a mistake. You could have kept your mouth shut. I stayed quiet. She's not built for this, my mother continued. She can't survive that kind of pressure. I didn't flinch. So you thought I could? Then I heard the slight rustle of a handoff. A second voice joined. My father, always the one who tried to sound reasonable. Like facts were tools he could arrange to make anything look tidy. We thought it would end with a seizure, he said. They'd take the items, close the file. No one else would be dragged in. But you sent it to my house, I said, under my name. He didn't respond. You used me. Because I don't have children. Because you thought if someone had to take the fall, you're stronger, Elena, he said. And that's when I understood. That was the reason. That was always the reason. You're stronger. You'll recover. You have no one else to protect. Just you. It wasn't even cruel in their minds. It was calculated mercy. I let the silence hang. Let them hear the breathing, on the other end, the refusal to fill the space. My mother broke first. "You've always been the cold one." I almost smiled. "No, I've just always known how to keep quiet when love started sounding like a transaction." Another beat of silence, then I ended the call. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the phone. I just set it down on the kitchen table and stared at it like it was another box sealed and rotting. Graham walked in carrying 2 mugs. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. He handed me mine, then sat across from me in silence. "They really thought I'd open it," I said finally, almost to myself. He nodded once. "They really did." And in that moment, I realized something that made the air turn sharp in my chest. They hadn't just tried to ruin me. They'd counted on me helping them do it. I didn't go to the hearing. There was no point in sitting on a bench behind Delia while she cried into a beige sweater, pretending to be the lost, misunderstood artist. I didn't need to hear my mother sigh theatrically or see my father adjust his collar like a man carrying a weight he forged himself. I didn't need any of that. Instead, I requested the transcript. Delia pled out, of course she did. Wire fraud, identity theft, business misrepresentation. 2 years probation, a mid-5-figure fine, and a ban on holding a business license until her mid-40s. No jail time, no cuffs. Just enough shame to stick to her like smoke. My parents weren't charged as aggressively. Aiding and abetting reads soft on paper, but their names still landed on the public record. Community service, financial penalties, required education in ethical business practices, which I'm sure my mother took as a personal insult. What they lost in court wasn't their future. It was the luxury of pretending. No more neighborhood potlucks where they bragged about both daughters doing so well. No more stories to clients about a family-run operation. Their version of us no longer existed in the public narrative. Now there was a file, a record, something official and unerasable, and somehow that mattered more than revenge ever could. A week later, they asked to meet. No Delia, this time just the 2 of them. They suggested a coffee shop 2 blocks from the courthouse. I said nothing for 2 days. Then I showed up 10 minutes late and ordered the most overpriced pastry on the menu, just to watch my mother's eye twitch. They were already seated side by side. My mother looked like she was calculating which facial expression might trigger my guilt reflex the fastest. My father was folding a napkin, probably rehearsing bullet points. I didn't sit right away. "We didn't know she used your name," my mother started. "You didn't ask either," I said. "She told us it was for shipping. She offered hands open like that made it better." I nodded. "Because fraud always begins with casual mailing." My father cleared his throat. "We thought it was temporary. She said you wouldn't mind. She also said I'd open the package," I reminded them. "And she was almost right." My mother looked away. "We didn't think it would go this far," she whispered. "You mean you didn't think you'd get caught?" They both stiffened. Then my mother said the thing she always kept for last, like a bullet in a hidden pocket. "You've always been stronger, Elena. You don't have kids. No one depends on you." I stared at her. And there it was, the logic they'd whispered to each other in the dark. That my life was less encumbered, more disposable. "You offered me up," I said quietly, "because you thought I'd survive it." "No," my father murmured. "Yes," I said. "That's exactly what you meant." I stood leaving half a coffee behind. "I hope you enjoy your community service," I said. "Maybe you'll finally learn what real work looks like." That night, I deleted everything. Their numbers, their emails, the emergency contacts still listing them as next of kin. Old backups, shared albums, even calendar reminders for birthdays I no longer celebrated. Not out of spite, just necessity. They don't get access anymore. Not to my time, not to my silence. And not to the version of me they built the stable daughter, the fallback plan, the one who could take the fall because she had less to lose. The next morning, Graham handed me coffee without a word. We sat at the kitchen table, sunlight catching the edges of the counter where the box had been. It wasn't there anymore, but its outline remained. Not physically, emotionally. Like a bruise I'd stopped pressing, but could still feel. I hadn't told anyone what they did. Not my coworkers. Not even Graham's sister, who always suspected things about my family, but never asked directly. I didn't need to explain it. I just needed to be done. Weeks passed. No calls, no messages, no apology. Until one envelope arrived in the mail, no return address, just my name written in my mother's handwriting. Inside was an old photo me and Delia as kids. Halloween. She was crying. I was holding her hand. On the back, "You've always protected her." That was it. No context, no signature. Just a memory repackaged as guilt. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I placed the photo in the bottom drawer of my desk, not to keep it. Just to remind myself that history doesn't excuse harm. Protecting someone doesn't mean letting them hurt you. They thought I'd open the box. They counted on it, that I'd still want to be the good daughter, the dependable one, the one who said yes without reading the fine print. But that version of me is gone. Now I sleep. Not always peacefully, but without checking the front door twice. I make dinner without glancing at my phone. I don't wait for their voices anymore. I don't hate them. But I won't forgive them either. Because forgiveness implies they misunderstood. They didn't. They knew exactly what they were doing, and I know exactly who I am now. The air reeked of expensive bourbon and fragile egos. I stood near the back of the ballroom, half-shadowed by a velvet curtain, dressed in my Air Force service blues. Not because I wanted attention, but because I didn't want to disappear entirely. My name is Harper Wells, and I've spent the last decade learning how to survive in places where no one cared who I was, only whether I could save a life under fire. But nothing prepared me for surviving this room. It was my father's annual political fundraiser, held at the Capitol Hill Country Club, a polished cage filled with men who'd never seen war, but talked strategy like it was poker. My father, Senator Gregory Wells, made his rounds like a king among pawns. When he passed me, he gave a brief nod. Not fatherly, not warm, just political, as if acknowledging the existence of someone who'd once embarrassed him. Then I heard my cousin Miles speaking just loud enough to sting. "She's just a medic," he said, smirking to a woman in pearls. "Blue collar and uniform." The words landed like a slap. My father heard it. He didn't flinch. Just smiled that weak, complicit smile that said, "Let it go." I almost did. I almost left. But that's when the doors opened, and everything changed. The crowd turned expecting a CEO or senator. Instead, they saw the President of the United States. And he wasn't looking at my father. He was looking straight at me. Is that her? Is that Major Wells? To understand the look on my father's face when the president called my name, you'd have to understand the world he built and the son he built it around. My older brother, Bradley Wells, was everything my parents ever wanted in a child. Valedictorian, law school at Yale, junior partner at a firm with gold-embossed letterhead. They used to say he was going places like success was a location you could book a first-class flight to. Every family photo had him front and center, smiling like he already owned the future. And in some ways he did. I wasn't the disappointment. I was the inconvenience. The stray thought. The child who didn't fit the script. At Bradley's law school graduation party, I remember standing near the hedges, holding a warm soda, watching strangers toast him like he'd won a war. A string quartet played under a silk tent. My father gave a booming speech about legacy ambition lineage. Then, with dramatic flair, he led everyone to the driveway, where a new black BMW gleamed under a red ribbon. "A man of his stature," he declared, "ought to arrive like one." People clapped. My mother dabbed her eyes. My brother beamed. I thought of the second-hand laptop I was still paying off in monthly installments, the used boots I wore to ROTC, the time I pawned my only good watch to afford a combat medical textbook. A year earlier, when I told them I wasn't going to attend the university they'd pre-selected for me, my mother had dropped her fork mid-bite. My father asked me flatly if I was pregnant. When I said I was enlisting, his face turned to stone. "Enlisting," he said. "Harper, are you hearing yourself? I want to become a pararescue man," I told them. "You mean a battlefield nurse," he corrected, his voice lined with contempt. I looked straight at him. "I mean a combat medic who jumps out of planes, survives behind enemy lines, and saves lives while being shot at." My mother nearly choked on her wine. "That's not who we raised you to be." That was the point, wasn't it? In our family, everything had a place. And people like me who didn't shine the way they expected were quietly boxed away. From that day forward, the space between us became an unspoken agreement. They sent cards on holidays, signed only with their names, not love. I stopped trying to explain what I did. They stopped asking. At family dinners, Bradley always sat in the center seat. I sat at the edge, smiling politely, waiting for a subject change. They didn't hate me. That would have required more effort. They simply didn't see me. But I saw everything. And standing there in that ballroom, just moments after the president spoke my name aloud, I knew the life my father had constructed around Bradley, around image, around control, was about to split down the middle. 2 years before that ballroom, I had earned something I never thought I'd even survive to reach promotion to technical sergeant. It had taken me 8 grueling years of deployments, night ops rescue dives, and battlefield trauma rotations to get there. Every stripe on my sleeve came with a scar, and for once, I wanted to share it. I called them 3 weeks before the pin-on ceremony. My voice shook slightly, half from the excitement, half from the fear of being dismissed again. Dad, I said they're promoting me next month. It's on base open to families. I'd really like it if you and Mom could be there. There was a pause. The kind that always came when the subject shifted away from Bradley. Well, he said we'll check the calendar. You know how things are around here. I waited. A week before the ceremony, no reply. 3 days before, still nothing. Then, the night before, my phone finally lit up. It was Mom. Her voice had that careful, performative gentleness, like she was preparing to hand me bad news wrapped in gift paper. Harper, sweetheart. I'm so sorry. We really wanted to come, but something's come up. I didn't say anything. She continued. Your brother. He didn't make partner. He's taking it very hard. We're flying to New York to be with him. He just really needs us right now. I didn't remember hanging up. I just remembered standing in my barracks room, the fluorescent light flickering above me, staring at the single ribbon box I had placed on the desk. They had canceled me. Again. This time for a title he didn't get. That morning, I pinned on the new stripes myself. A fellow airman offered to take a photo. I said no. Somehow it felt worse to commemorate a moment no one cared to witness. Later that week, my dad sent a single-line email. Congratulations. We're sure you'll continue doing well. No call, no visit, no mention of the ceremony. I remember sitting in the empty mess hall that evening, watching the clock tick past 2100. My tray still had half a sandwich untouched. I felt not sad, not angry, just scraped clean, like someone had emptied out the center of me and left the shell standing. It wasn't that they didn't come. It was that they never even considered why it might matter. To them, I was the background, and the background doesn't get a spotlight. But in that quiet moment, I made a promise. If I was ever going to be seen, truly seen, it wouldn't be because I begged for it. It would be because the world left them no other choice. The moment the president walked into that ballroom, the atmosphere changed, like someone had sucked the oxygen out of it. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Champagne glasses froze mid-air. Even my father, who once prided himself on shaking hands with 4 former presidents, straightened his tie like he was prepping for a royal visit. But the president didn't look at him. He didn't look at the senators or billionaires, or the Wall Street heir my mother had been shamelessly flattering near the bar. He looked at me. His voice cut through the hush like a scalpel. Is that her? Is that Major Harper Wells? My father's hand extended for a handshake that never came, just hung there, caught in the air like a failed performance. My cousin Miles audibly choked on his drink. The woman next to him gasped and stepped back, like she was standing too close to something radioactive. I didn't move. The president walked toward me with purpose, his aides flanking him like shadows. When he reached me, he didn't offer a handshake. Instead, he clasped my shoulder steady and firm. Major Wells, he said, thank you for being here tonight. I've been meaning to meet you personally. I managed a respectful nod. Sir, I said, keeping my voice calm, despite the tremor beneath my ribs. He turned to one of his aides, who stepped forward and introduced himself quietly. Major Wells, the man said, the president would like to extend an official invitation for you to attend a private ceremony next week at the White House. He would like to award you the Distinguished Service Cross for your actions during Operation Winterlight. My blood turned cold. Operation Winterlight was classified so deeply, I wasn't sure I was even allowed to think about it. A failed extraction in the Northern Highlands, a downed Black Hawk, 3 KIA, 1 CIA asset retrieved alive, 1 medic me who refused to leave the wounded behind. I nodded once. The aide lowered his voice. The president was fully briefed. Your leadership during the crisis. It was exceptional. I stood perfectly still as the ballroom buzzed again, low voices, confused stares, my father trying to smile like he was somehow involved. Then I made a decision. It came to me, cold and clear, like an ice cube down the spine. I looked the aide in the eye. Would it be possible for my family to attend the ceremony, I asked? He tilted his head, slightly studying me. Of course, Major. We'd be honored to host them. He meant it as kindness, but for me, it was strategy. This wasn't about recognition anymore. This was about confrontation, served in full dress beneath the chandeliers of a house they revered more than the daughter they had ignored. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and reverence. It was one of the smaller briefing suites in the West Wing, intimate, heavy with history, and just large enough to feel claustrophobic when truth decided to settle in. A presidential aide had met me outside and walked me in. My family was already seated. They hadn't known I was coming. I saw it in the way my father immediately adjusted his posture, how my mother's eyes flicked to my uniform like it was an outfit she couldn't quite remember buying. Miles gave a twitch of a smile, unsure whether he was supposed to be impressed or threatened, and Bradley, my brother, offered that same lopsided smirk he'd worn since middle school debate. He leaned in just enough to mutter, "Guess your little hobby finally paid off." I didn't respond. I simply took the seat the aide gestured toward, across from them, facing forward, and waited. Moments later, the doors opened again. This time, it wasn't an aide. It was the president. He walked in without announcement, without entourage, just presence, the kind that made even the most self-important men in the room unconsciously rise to their feet. But he didn't look at them. He walked directly to me. "Major Wells," he said, warm but resolute, "I'm honored you accepted our invitation." "Yes, sir," I replied evenly. He turned to my family. "I asked all of you here because I believe there's something you deserve to understand, something most families never get to hear." They froze, expressions politely blank, like people bracing for a story that might exclude them. Then he began. He didn't dramatize it. He didn't embellish. He simply told the truth. About Operation Winterlight. About a failed extraction in hostile territory. A helicopter torn apart by ground fire. 3 lives lost within the first 15 minutes. A mission gone sideways in a remote mountain range with no name. And then about me. About how I, already wounded, had crawled through the debris to find the one surviving intelligence officer. How I set a collapsed lung using a needle and a flashlight held between my teeth. How I coordinated air cover using a damaged satellite radio and set perimeter flares while fending off advancing hostiles for nearly 6 hours. How I kept that man alive, his ribs broken, his blood pressure, crashing by whispering stories, and applying pressure with bare hands when all the gauze ran out. When he finished, the room was silent. The president turned to my father. "Senator Wells," he said, "you may not have known the full extent of your daughter's service, but let me assure you she didn't just serve. She saved this nation from a diplomatic catastrophe. She led, she endured, and she exemplified what this country should be proud of." Then he looked at me. "Major," he asked, "is there anything you'd like to add?" I turned my gaze toward my family, 4 faces I knew better than they ever knew me. My voice was steady. "No, sir," I said. "I was just doing my job." No one spoke for the first 10 minutes of the car ride. The silence wasn't awkward, it was oppressive, like fog that had weight. I sat behind the driver, staring out at the streets of D.C. as we rolled past monuments and memories lights reflecting in the tinted windows like ghosts. My mother finally broke the silence. Her voice was thin, almost childlike. "Harper, we're so proud of you." I didn't turn around. From the passenger seat, my father added truly, "That was incredible." I kept my eyes on the reflection of the Capitol dome shrinking in the glass. Bradley shifted beside me. I could feel his discomfort radiating. But he didn't speak. Neither did Miles. They sat like statues carved from embarrassment. They weren't offering me pride. They were offering themselves a lifeline. I didn't take it, because it was never really about me, not before, and certainly not now. It was about reconciling the narrative, reframing me in their minds as something they could explain at parties. I didn't answer, didn't nod, didn't smile. Eventually, my mother tried again. "I wish we had known sooner about what you'd done." I almost laughed, but it came out as a breath. "You never asked." That shut them up. When we reached their hotel, the car stopped. The driver looked at me in the mirror, waiting. I nodded slightly. They took the cue. My parents stepped out first, murmuring goodbyes with the fragile courtesy of people leaving a wake. Bradley followed, his expression unreadable. Miles was last. He glanced back at me before closing the door, as if wanting to say something, but he didn't. The door clicked shut. The silence returned. But this time it felt cleaner. That night in my hotel room, I watched the city lights crawl across the ceiling. The medal sat on the dresser, the velvet box half open. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. They had seen it, heard the story, stood in the room, and for the first time it wasn't about being forgiven or accepted or even acknowledged. It was about being undeniable. A few days later, my phone rang. My mother again. Her voice had returned to that performative normalcy, the tone she used when pretending we were just a regular family. We were thinking, she said, we should throw you a party, a real celebration, invite everyone, maybe even the press, nothing big, just something tasteful. I let her finish. Then I said the words I should have said a decade earlier. No, thank you. She paused. I don't need a party, I added, and I don't need an audience. Before she could pivot into guilt or nostalgia, I said it clean. I have to go now. And I hung up. The line went dead. And for the first time in my life, it felt like peace. Peace didn't arrive with fireworks. It came in smaller moments, the kind most people overlook. A morning run before sunrise, the scrape of boots on gravel, the silence that settles after a trainee's scream fades into determination. A year after the ceremony, I transitioned out of field operations. My knees still ached when the temperature dropped. The scar across my thigh tugged with every shift in weight. But I hadn't retired. Not really. I was stationed at Redstone Training Facility in Arizona, where I now served as an instructor for pararescue candidates. The very same program that had once broken me down and rebuilt me bone by bone. Out here, there were no press releases, no podiums, just sweat dust and the relentless push for better. It suited me. Most days I stayed in the background, watching, correcting, sometimes barking orders when safety demanded it. But every now and then, someone would falter in a way I recognized too well. One afternoon, a candidate barely 20 froze halfway across the suspended rope course, arms shaking, eyes wide. The desert wind made the rope sway harder than usual. He looked down once and stopped moving completely. Other instructors watched in silence, waiting to see if he'd self-correct. I walked to the base of the platform. He saw me coming and looked ashamed already. I can't, he muttered. I can't move. I didn't yell. I didn't coach. I climbed. Side by side, boots scraping rope fingers numb. When I reached him, I didn't offer encouragement. I offered instruction. Forget the end, I said. Just find the next grip. He blinked. That's it. One move, then another. That's all you ever have to do. He nodded slowly, hand trembling as he reached forward. Then again, and again. When he finally made it across, he collapsed into the dirt, laughing and crying at the same time. I stood at the other end, watching quietly. There was no applause, but there didn't need to be. That night we had a cookout behind the instructor barracks. Nothing fancy. Folding chairs, cheap beer-burnt sausages on foil. We told stories, some true, most exaggerated, and laughed at things civilians would never understand. One of the senior medics slapped my back and said, "Hell of a save up there today." I just shrugged. Wasn't about the rope. He grinned. No, it never is. Later, alone in my bunk, I thought about the medal. It was locked in a drawer. I hadn't touched it in months. But I thought about that kid, his fear, his grit, the way he kept climbing. And I realized something I hadn't put into words until that moment. The world had watched me get a medal once. But out here, I got to give people a reason to believe they could earn one too. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the photo came through. A message from my father. No greeting, no context, just an image. My Distinguished Service Cross perfectly framed in dark walnut and mounted in a spotlighted corner of his office right next to Bradley's law degree. Beneath it, a caption in his familiar formal tone, "The centerpiece of my collection. Everyone is so impressed." I stared at it for a long moment, not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. He still didn't get it. To him, the medal wasn't a story of blood-cold pain or resolve. It wasn't the weight of carrying another man's life through hostile fire. It wasn't the stillness of being forgotten. To him, it was proof he hadn't failed as a father. A conversation piece. A shiny redemption arc he could point to on the wall and say, "That's my daughter," without ever having known what it meant to see me. I didn't reply. I just deleted the message, and with it, the last piece of permission I had ever looked for. That evening, I walked to the edge of the Redstone training field. The sun was setting low, dragging soft orange light across the sand. The wind moved slowly through the tall flags and empty bleachers. At the far end, there was a simple wooden bench bolted into the earth. I sat there with both feet flat on the gravel and my hands resting on my thighs. It was quiet. No cadets, no shouting, no noise but the wind through the course. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who had stood at the edge of every family photo waiting to be noticed, the one who pinned her own stripes in an empty hangar, the one who learned to stop hoping someone would ask her what the mission was. And then I thought about today, about the trainees who whispered, "If she can do it, maybe I can too," about the medic who emailed me to say she made it through a deployment because someone once told her my name, about the young airman who finished the ropes course last week and saluted me like I was the reason he hadn't let go. The medal was still in my drawer, but my legacy was never meant to hang on a wall. It was meant to live in motion, in grit, in sweat, in silence. Legacy is what echoes when the ceremony is over, when no one is clapping, when no one is watching. Just you, the sky, and the purpose you never needed to explain. That's what I carried now. Not anger, not pride, just clarity and peace. My name is Eliza Monroe. I've served in naval intelligence for over a decade. I've tracked arms deals in backwater ports, intercepted encrypted communications from the Black Sea to the Strait of Hormuz. But none of that prepared me for the moment my own father stood, uniform, pressed metals shining, and told a tribunal of admirals that I was unfit to wear the uniform. He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked straight ahead, chin-high voice, steady. "She lacks command judgment," he declared. "She jeopardized the integrity of the mission." My hands didn't move. My face didn't twitch. I just stared at him, wondering if he remembered the night I bled out beneath the hull of a crippled patrol boat. If he remembered who trained me to crawl through darkness, who gave me the Navy Cross after my first deployment, who whispered, "You were born for this," before my first command. But the room was silent now, waiting. So I did what I hadn't done in months. I stood. I reached for the buttons of my dress blues, not for effect, not for drama, but because there was no other language that held truth anymore. I pulled back the fabric, slowly exposing the ridged pale scars that ran like veins across my ribcage. The room didn't gasp. No one spoke. Even he, Colonel Frank Monroe, finally turned his head. And for the first time, he saw what survival had cost me. And I saw what silence had cost him. That night, they left me on the deck of the hospital ship, barely conscious, lungs filled with seawater and smoke. A medic named Benton held my shoulder down, while another stitched my side without anesthesia. They had more casualties than morphine. I remember the way his fingers trembled, not from fear, but from exhaustion. He'd been stitching for 13 hours straight. I wasn't supposed to survive. The ambush had torn through our unit like a blade. The patrol boat we were ordered to board had been rigged an internal detonation system triggered as soon as our boots hit the deck. Half the team died instantly. Sergeant Ross and I were thrown clear, slammed against the bulkhead, buried under twisted steel. She screamed once, then the silence swallowed us. When I woke up, it was 2 days later. My jaw was wired shut, my ribs shattered. I couldn't lift my hand to brush hair from my eyes. But someone had already filed the report. And it wasn't mine. The version that went through command made no mention of the faulty intel, no reference to the altered coordinates, no hint that we'd been deployed early without air recon under direct orders from Admiral Frey, a man who conveniently retired 2 days after my team was hit. Worse than that, it claimed I had frozen. Failure to communicate with ground unit delay in response protocol, possible disorientation under fire. They called it an operational anomaly. My father read that report, and he believed it. When I asked to file a rebuttal, my clearance was suspended. I couldn't even access the mission logs. For security purposes, they said, pending full review. But I knew what that meant. They wanted to bury the file, and bury me with it. The scars on my ribs weren't from bad luck. They were from a decision someone had made far above my pay grade. And the man who once taught me how to navigate by stars now acted like I no longer had a place on his map. So I requested a tribunal, not because I thought I'd win, but because I couldn't let the lie wear the uniform longer than I did. There's a room in my father's house where he keeps every medal he's ever earned. Silver Star, Navy Distinguished Service, even a framed letter from the Secretary of Defense, thanking him for his unwavering service to the integrity of national command. That room always felt colder than the rest of the house. I used to sit on the floor beneath those frames when I was a child, legs crossed, trying to imagine what it felt like to be inside the kind of legacy that made grown men salute without question. He was never cruel, never violent, but he demanded a silence that left no room for doubt. So when I stood before him weeks after the hospital, asking if he believed what they wrote about me, I already knew the answer. He didn't even hesitate. "I believe in protocol," he said. "And I believe in the chain of command, not in me." He wasn't just my father. He was Colonel Frank Monroe, retired, decorated, and still a revered consultant on advanced naval operations. The tribunal's lead investigator was once his subordinate. The chairwoman of the review board had served with him during the Gulf. He didn't need to raise a hand or speak out loud. His silence cleared rooms. That silence nearly erased me. I started making noise in the only way the system couldn't ignore through paperwork. I filed 3 appeals. Each bounced back with vague language, insufficient evidence, classified documentation pending jurisdictional review. Every door I knocked on had already been locked from the inside. It was Maya Ross who finally called. Her voice was hoarse, damaged from smoke inhalation, but it was her. She'd survived too, but barely. Tracheal reconstruction had left her with only minutes of speech each day. She used one of those minutes to tell me she had a copy of our mission's secondary comm log. I kept it, because I knew they'd lie. She said, her breath crackling through the line. That log would prove the timeline was falsified, that we had reported hostile presence 3 hours earlier, that someone had knowingly sent us in blind. But Maya was off-grid, hiding with her sister in Virginia, scared of being followed. "You come to me," she whispered. "No phones, no texts, just you." I booked the ticket that night. Before I left, I passed by my father's house. I didn't go in. I just stood outside, staring at the flag in his front yard, the one that still flew for a truth he no longer served. Maya lived in a cabin so deep in the Blue Ridge, it didn't show up on Google Maps. Her sister met me at a gas station off Route 220 and drove me the rest of the way in silence. There were no words needed. The moment I stepped out of the car and saw Maya on the porch, wrapped in a thick hoodie, her neck hidden beneath a scarf, I understood. Some wounds don't leave blood. Her eyes lit up when she saw me, but she didn't speak. Instead, she opened the cabin door and gestured for me to follow. Inside, it smelled like cedar and smoke. A fire was already going. She moved slowly, deliberately, her breath shallow but steady. We sat across from each other. She handed me a tablet booted in offline mode. "No cloud," she mouthed. She tapped the screen twice, and a folder opened, Operation Halberd Altcoms log. It wasn't long, just a scroll of embedded timestamps and location tags recorded directly from her comms receiver. I knew the code structure. Each ping marked a status report, each bracketed entry a recorded voice command. I found it. Do Chojotukthiri Zulu. Alpha unit reporting suspicious vessel drift pattern. 0227 Zulu. Requesting aerial recon due to non-compliant signals. To2R4 Zulu. Orders received, proceed without recon. The timestamps predated our official deployment orders by over an hour. It confirmed everything we'd tried to say, that someone had overruled protocol, fast-tracked our launch, and erased the early warnings. I looked up. Maya nodded once. Then, with a slow breath, she reached into a wooden box beneath the table and pulled out something wrapped in navy cloth. When she unfolded it, I froze. It was my sidearm. Standard issue serial, registered to me. I had dropped it when the blast knocked me unconscious, but here it was, scraped, scorched, and intact. "I found it next to you," she whispered. "They never logged it." My pulse slowed. Chain of evidence, broken. If command had covered up the sidearm's recovery, it meant they were hiding more than negligence. It meant they were hiding the fact that I'd never even made it to the engagement phase, that I was hit before I could act. I reached across the table, took her hand, and held it for a long time. Not to say thank you, not to promise revenge, just to say I remember too. That night, I drove back toward Annapolis in silence. The tablet, the gun, the proof, they sat in a sealed envelope in my bag. But none of it weighed more than the scarf Maya still wore to cover the burn across her throat. She'd given me her voice. Now it was my turn to use it. The tribunal chamber was colder than I remembered. Rows of polished mahogany chairs lined both sides of the room, their occupants dressed in full uniform silver stars, eagles' ribbons that stretched from collar to sternum. The air was thick with formality, but underneath it pulsed something older hierarchy. Deference, quiet violence. I stood at attention alone at the center of the floor, the back of my neck prickling under the weight of 24 decorated stairs. My counsel sat behind me, silent hands folded. We had submitted the evidence package that morning. Maya's comms logged the time-stamped report, the unregistered sidearm, but none of it had been acknowledged on the agenda. They wanted to keep this clean, quick, contained. Admiral Jennings presided calm, unreadable, a man who had led carrier strike groups across 3 oceans and once stared down a Chinese destroyer without blinking. He tapped a gavel. The room settled. "Lieutenant Monroe," he said, "before we begin formal questioning, Colonel Frank Monroe has submitted a request to speak." There was a pause. I didn't move. Then the sound of chair legs scraping wood. He stood. My father was dressed immaculately as always. His jaw was tight, his voice steady, every inch the commander I once thought unbreakable. "She lacks command judgment." He began facing the board. "Her failure to adapt under combat conditions contributed to unnecessary casualties. I do not believe she should retain active duty clearance." He said it like a weather report. No rage, no accusation, just finality. The room didn't flinch. They nodded, moved forward. Jennings turned to me. "Lieutenant, do you wish to respond?" I did. But I didn't speak. I stepped back, removed my jacket with careful hands, and turned to face the room. The gasps were quiet, but undeniable. White ridges ran across my ribs, climbing like vines. Fractured bone healed unevenly, skin puckered around scar tissue, the clear, permanent geography of trauma. I didn't cover them. I didn't explain. I just let the room look. Then I reached into my folder and pulled out the comms transcript, sliding it across the table toward the clerk. "For the record," I said quietly, "those injuries were sustained before I was given a chance to issue my first order." Silence. Even my father didn't speak. Admiral Jennings leaned forward. "I'd like a recess," he said, his voice low. He didn't look at me. He looked at my father. They moved us into a smaller room, no windows, just a long table and walls lined with closed files. A clerk brought water, but no one touched it. My counsel sat to my right. Across from us, Admiral Jennings, 2 tribunal aides, and my father. Frank Monroe stood with his arms folded, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. Jennings broke the silence first. "I've reviewed the file Lieutenant Monroe submitted," he said. "The metadata on the comms log checks out. The time discrepancy is real. The deployment order was signed 21 minutes after hostile contact was confirmed." My father blinked but didn't respond. Jennings continued sliding a secondary document across the table. "This," he said, tapping the page, "is the authorization for early launch. It's signed by Rear Admiral Frey. Do you know who countersigned it?" My father said nothing. Jennings glanced at me. "Colonel Monroe's signature appears in the digital log," he said flatly, "as confirming officer." My breath didn't catch. I had already known, but hearing it out loud forced a different kind of silence. My father finally spoke. "The intel package we received indicated no threat. The request for recon was still under assessment when Frey moved the timeline, and yet Jennings said you confirmed it." There was no accusation in his voice. Just disappointment, measured cold, familiar. My father straightened. "I trusted the system." Jennings looked at him for a long moment. "The system trusted you." He stood, signaling the end of the private session. "This isn't a formal reprimand, not yet. But Colonel, your access credentials are suspended effective immediately. We'll be reviewing every approval you signed in connection with Operation Halberd." He turned to me. "Lieutenant Monroe, return to the chamber. We'll reconvene in 10. As I rose, I glanced at my father expecting anger, maybe shame, but there was only stillness. Then, just before I reached the door, I heard his voice again. Low quiet meant only for me. I didn't think they'd send you. I paused, then walked on. Back in the main chamber, the tribunal resumed. Jennings summarized the findings, acknowledged the verified evidence, and concluded the formal reprimand against my record was vacated. There was no applause, no medals, just the slow, cold unwinding of something that had nearly buried me. But when I sat down, I saw something on the bench beside my folder. My father's officer insignia removed from his uniform wrapped in a small cloth. No note, just the weight of it, and the choice to give it up. I carried the insignia in my pocket for weeks. Not because I didn't know what to do with it, but because I didn't know what it meant anymore. It wasn't an apology. My father had never said the words. It wasn't forgiveness either. He hadn't asked for that. It simply existed like everything about him, sharp-edged, silent, and heavy. After the tribunal closed, they gave me a seat at a table no one spoke about. I was cleared of fault, reinstated quietly, and offered administrative leave. The Navy's way of saying, "You were right, but please disappear while we clean this up." I didn't fight it. I didn't want medals or interviews. I just wanted oxygen. So I packed a single duffel, left Annapolis under a gray sky, and drove until the GPS stopped finding signal. I landed at a rented bungalow on the edge of a decommissioned training base in coastal Georgia. The fence posts were rusted, the sand blew straight into the porch, and gulls screamed louder than memory. It was perfect. I spent most mornings walking barefoot across the gravel path to the water. My ribs ached in the cold, deep aches that flared beneath scar tissue whenever I breathed too hard or too fast. A reminder, not a punishment. Some days I said nothing at all. I didn't check email. I didn't open the news. I just sat on the dock with my knees pulled to my chest and listened to the tide chew through everything I used to believe. Then one morning it came. A package. No return address, no note. Just wrapped in plain brown paper and string sitting on my porch, like it had always belonged there. Inside a leather-bound journal, faded and worn. My father's. I recognized the spine. He used to keep it locked in a drawer behind his desk, next to the flag that draped his father's casket. It wasn't part of any record I knew of. It wasn't meant to be seen. The pages were full of field diagrams, contingency drills, tactical refinements. But that wasn't what caught me. It was the margins. In the narrow space beside every map and calculation, he had written questions, fragments, doubts. Does mission success excuse the quiet casualties? Where is the line between readiness and cruelty? If I taught her to obey without question, did I raise a soldier or a shadow? I ran my fingers down that final page so slowly I could feel the groove of each letter pressed into the paper. Command isn't control. It's accountability, no signature. But he didn't need one. That night, I left the journal on my nightstand beside the insignia. I didn't touch either, but I slept fully for the first time in months. A week later, I got a call from Naval Education Command. Someone had read the tribunal transcript. Someone higher up had read between the lines. They asked if I would consider building a course. Not about tactics, not about espionage, but about leadership rooted in moral clarity. What happens when the orders are flawed, when the cost isn't in statistics, but in scars? I asked how long I'd have. As long as it takes, they said. So I said yes. The first time I stood at the podium, the cadets rose, not out of habit, not because I was a lieutenant again, but because they had read, because they knew. They didn't salute. They didn't cheer. But they looked at me like something in them understood for the first time what leadership costs. I didn't talk about war. I talked about Maya. I talked about the voice she almost lost, and the truth she gave me when no one else would. I talked about silence, what it erodes. And I talked about my father. Not as a villain, not even by name, but as a man who once thought the stars on his shoulder would protect him from doubt. I ended that session with the story of the tribunal. And when I left the room, I tucked his insignia, into the drawer beneath the lectern. It didn't belong to me anymore. I didn't return to active duty. Not because I couldn't. I had the clearance, the backing, the quiet nods in hallways that used to turn cold. But the part of me that once craved deployment, that fed on precision and adrenaline, that part had gone quiet. Not broken. Just finished. I stayed in Georgia, turned the little bungalow into something almost permanent, hung up the dress blues in a closet I didn't open often, Some mornings, I still woke to phantom alarms, muscle memory from years of missions. But most mornings, I woke to birdsong and wind, and the slow stretch of breath that didn't hurt anymore. Maya visited once. Her voice hadn't fully returned, but her eyes said everything. We sat on the dock for hours, watching the sky curl into dusk. I told her about the cadets, about the journal, about how, for the first time, my father hadn't tried to control the narrative. He'd simply let go. She smiled, then reached out and touched the spot just beneath my collarbone, where the edge of a scar ran like a line drawn in defiance. "You wear it different now," she rasped. I didn't answer, but she was right. The scar was still there. It would always be there, but it no longer spoke of failure or fury. It had become something else, a mark of choice, of survival on my own terms. Later that fall, I was invited to speak at the Naval Ethics Summit in Annapolis. I almost said no, but something in me wanted to see it again. Not the tribunal hall, not the base, but the sky over the river, the one I used to stare at during long training days, wondering who I'd become. I kept my speech short. No slides, no quotes, just this. There will come a day when the silence in a room feels louder than any battlefield. When following orders no longer feels like duty, but complicity. And when that day comes, remember what you promised. Not to the system, not to the rank, but to the people who carry the cost of your decisions. In their lungs, in their bones, in their sleep. They didn't applaud. That's not what the room was for. But afterward, a young woman approached, still in training, freckles across her nose. She didn't speak at first, just looked at me with the kind of searching stare I used to give my father. Finally, she asked, "Ma'am, does it ever stop hurting?" I smiled, not sadly. But truthfully, no. But it stops owning you. That night, I stood alone on the dock back home, the water black and still. I slipped off my boots, let the boards press into my feet, and tilted my face toward the sky. The wind picked up just enough to move my hair, and I closed my eyes. The scar tugged slightly as I breathed in. And I let it, because I wasn't hiding it anymore. They said I humiliated my own brother in front of 3 generals and a table full of senior officers, that I shattered his career just to prove a point. But they weren't the ones holding the clearance badge that morning, or the responsibility if a single line of code leaked. They didn't see the red stripe missing from his tag. I did. My name is Evelyn Reese, 34 United States Army Intelligence, and that day in the skiff briefing room wasn't about vengeance. It was about containment, about silence, about holding the line, even when the breach came in the form of your own family. He leaned back, like we were still kids in the garage, swapping jokes over motor oil and static radios. "Careful, Evelyn," he said, just loud enough for the room to shift. "Don't let your top-secret binder get in the way of real soldiering." There was a cough in the back. Not quite laughter, just discomfort. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. My fingers didn't tremble. My voice didn't break. I clicked to the next slide and kept talking. A satellite image, a data point, a threat vector. And 2 minutes later, security walked in. They didn't call his name. They didn't need to. Because this wasn't about family anymore. This was about protocol. And I wasn't his sister in that moment. I was the officer in charge of the room he never should have entered. Until... We grew up in a 2-bedroom ranch house tucked against the cliffs outside Morro Bay. The kind of place where the air always smelled like salt and engine grease. My father served 22 years in Navy maintenance before taking a civilian contract at the harbor yards. He believed in torque wrenches, hard water, and kids who didn't talk back. My brother Noah was everything my dad understood, loud, fast, reckless. By 10, he could strip a carburetor blindfolded. By 13, he'd already broken his collarbone twice doing backyard stunts he called practice. He had this laugh, wild, unapologetic, and the kind of magnetic charm that made even teachers forget detention. Me, I was the quiet one. The low-maintenance child, my mother liked to say, though I stopped mistaking that for a compliment somewhere around the 5th time she said it in front of guests. I read manuals for fun, built circuits in shoeboxes, asked too many questions at dinner. The first time I beat Noah at something measurable, it was a math contest in 8th grade, regional. I held the trophy the whole car ride home waiting. My father glanced at it once at a stoplight, then said, "Hope you thanked your teacher." That was it. No steak dinner, no clap on the back, Just a reminder to stay polite. Noah got suspended the next month for painting a rival school's mascot in crude detail on the auditorium wall. Dad picked him up from the principal's office like he was returning from battle. They stopped for burgers. I watched the ketchup stains harden on their napkins and said nothing. The house had rules, unspoken but deeply enforced. 1. Don't upstage your brother. 2. Don't expect applause. 3. If something breaks, you'd better know how to fix it or how to keep quiet. I followed them, for years. When I got my ROTC scholarship to Cal Poly, my mother smiled like I'd found a cute new hobby. My father's only comment was, "Don't come back soft." Noah laughed. "Gonna lead a battalion of spreadsheets, huh?" The night before I left for basic, I found my acceptance letter in the trash curled and damp beneath a pizza box. I didn't ask who tossed it. And still, I left the porch light on when I came home that first winter break. Just in case someone wanted to talk, no one did. Noah had a new girlfriend, a cast on his wrist, and a story about a bar fight he told 5 times before dessert. I sat at the kitchen table tracing the grain in the wood with my thumbnail. There was a framed photo of him in uniform by the Sync boot camp graduation. Crisp Blue's wide grin. My photo wasn't up there. Mine was in a drawer somewhere behind the receipts. That was the rhythm. Noah, the story. Me, the footnote. Even when we both wore the uniform. At Fort Eddington, I passed every clearance hurdle they threw at me. Polygraphs, background checks, psych evals, so invasive, they made me question memories I thought were solid. When I got my TSCI badge, I mailed a photo home. No one replied. A week later, Noah texted, "Congrats, Officer Reese. Let me know if you ever need someone to fix your paper jams." I stared at that message a long time. Not because it hurt. I was used to that. But because deep down, I still wanted him to be proud. And I hated that part of me most of all. There's a kind of quiet that builds over years. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that settles between people who once shared everything. Bathroom counters, backyard bikes, late-night cereal, and now can't find a reason to say more than 3 words on holidays. By the time I pinned on my captain's bars, Noah had already deployed twice and come home with a combat action ribbon and a scar that stretched from his elbow to his wrist. At Thanksgiving, he held it out like a trophy between courses. My father poured him another drink and said, "Now that's real service." I was home on a 4-day pass from a joint intel operation that ran out of a secure site in Colorado. I'd worked 16-hour shifts prepping cyber briefings, watched foreign intrusion patterns bounce across servers like wildfire. My voice was hoarse for days after my last debrief. No one asked about it. Instead, Noah clinked his beer bottle against mine and said, "So how's life behind the desk?" Major spreadsheet. I wasn't a major yet, not officially, but the paperwork had already been processed. I could have told him that. Could have mentioned the satellite reroute protocol. I authored the one that got picked up by 2 interagency task forces. Instead, I smiled, took a sip, let the jab land where it always did beneath the ribs where the bruises didn't show. At home, accomplishment was only real if it made noise. Noah made noise. I made systems. He'd crash through a door and win the room. I'd read the room before I walked in. And yet somehow he was the one who always got to define what counted as strength. It didn't change when I made major. The orders came in while I was at a cyber symposium in Virginia. I didn't cry. I didn't even smile, not right away. Just stared at the email, feeling the weight of it settle like armor. Major Evelyn Reese. It looked clean, undeniable. I called my mother. She said, "Oh, that's nice, honey." I called my father. He said, "Does that mean more paperwork?" That night, I sat alone in a hotel room with a glass of flat champagne and a view of the parking lot. My phone buzzed. It was a group text from Noah. A meme Barbie in camouflage saluting under the caption, "Congratulations, ma'am. Don't forget us little people." 2 laughing emojis. No words from me. He never mentioned it again. Neither did I. And still I kept showing up. Kept briefing colonels, sitting in on threat assessments, writing protocols that would never see the light of day, but carried real-world consequences. I worked in a world of red lines and frozen expressions, where precision mattered more than charm, and knowing when to not speak was as critical as decoding a signal. But even in that world, controlled, sterile, secure, his voice found me. Bet those PowerPoints are lethal. Intel Barbie. You memorize enemy frequencies, or just rehearse them like Shakespeare always. in the form of a joke. Always with that grin like he was doing me a favor by not being cruel outright. I didn't respond. I thought if I stayed quiet, kept rising someday, he'd see the difference. Someday he'd realize I wasn't behind him. I was ahead. And maybe that's why he never wanted to see me clearly. Because recognizing me meant admitting he'd never caught up. And he wasn't ready to lose the game he'd been winning since we were kids. It was a Friday, overcast. The kind of sky that pressed down on you like a warning you didn't know how to read. I was finalizing prep for a high-level joint cyber briefing, one that had taken 2 weeks of cross-branch coordination, 4 sleepless nights, and a classified summary, so sensitive it could only be printed inside the SCIF. It wasn't my first time leading a room like that, but this one mattered. Command presence was expected. Precision wasn't optional. At 07:35, an automated logistics bulletin landed in my inbox. I almost didn't open it. Most of those notices weren't relevant unless you worked motor pool or munitions. But something about the subject line made me pause. Personnel transfer update observation support rotation. I scanned the attached roster. Line 17. Sergeant Noah Reese, Logistics Liaison Observation Support, temporary access, clearance level outer perimeter. My hand stilled on the trackpad. I reread it twice. Then again, not in my unit. Not in my chain of command. But close. Too close. He was coming to Fort Cardale. He'd be assigned as observer on a logistics rotation, intersecting with my operational window. Not cleared for cyber briefings. Not cleared for TSCI rooms, but in the building, in proximity, within breathing range of systems he'd never respected. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence press in. The fluorescent hum of the office lights was suddenly deafening. The walls felt too white, too sterile. He wouldn't treat it seriously. He'd laugh, make comments, pull rank not with insignia, but with memory, with every time he got the last word over mashed potatoes, and I was told to be polite. He wouldn't see the weight behind these walls. The tension that builds when you hold national security between your hands, like glass, knowing one wrong gesture, can shatter trust you spent years earning. I closed the laptop. Didn't turn on music. Didn't check my phone. Just sat there, the air too still, the quiet suddenly crowded with the past. That Monday, I walked into the SCIF early. Did my own security sweep out of habit. Checked the slides. The room was set 23 assigned seats, 3 observers, 2 civilians from NSA, 1 liaison from the DIA, and then a 4th. Row 4 seat B, a name badge I hadn't authorized. Sergeant Noah Reese. No clearance stripe, no embedded chip, just a generic barcode and a title that meant he shouldn't have been there. He strolled in 5 minutes later like he owned the air, khakis not uniform, that same swagger he wore in high school whenever he copied my science project and called it collaboration. He sat, leaned back, arms crossed, foot bouncing. "Morning, sis," he said, loud enough for half the room to hear. "Careful not to spill any state secrets. I know how clingy your files can get." A few people smirked. One person coughed into their sleeve. I didn't look at him. I didn't blink. I turned my head toward the security liaison at the back of the room. Just a glance, nothing more. She caught it instantly. Stood. Slipped out the door. I moved to the podium. Clicked to slide 1. Satellite node imagery. My voice didn't waver. This is the primary foreign signal intercept node identified in Operation Frostline. Over the last 21 days, it's been spoofing US-based IP traffic to camouflage outbound packet signatures from Eastern Europe. Noah coughed. Loud, overacted. I ignored it because I wasn't there to manage his ego anymore. I was there to guard the room. And he had no idea just how badly he'd misread the rules. Exactly 2 minutes into the briefing, the door hissed open. 2 military police officers entered in full uniform, no rush, no announcement. Just controlled motion, the kind that doesn't need permission to command a room. They didn't look at me. They didn't need to. I'd already done my part. I didn't pause the slide deck. I didn't explain. They walked past the 3rd row, turned down the aisle, and stopped at row 4 seat B. Noah glanced up confused at first, then amused. "Whoa, what's this?" "Thought we weren't doing surprise inspections," he said with that same grin, cocky, untouchable, the kind you only wear when you think the rules are written in pencil. The lead MP leaned in just enough for only him to hear. I didn't catch the words, but I knew the phrasing, knew the tone. I'd used it myself. "Sir, you are not cleared for this briefing. You'll need to come with us." Noah looked at me then. Only for a second. His mouth opened like he might argue, like he might perform one of his grand indignations, but something shifted. Maybe it was the room 20 pairs of eyes trained forward silent. Maybe it was the realization that no one was laughing with him this time. He stood slowly, straightened the sleeves of his jacket, like he was doing us all a favor by leaving on his terms. "Guess I missed the invite," he muttered. "Must have gotten lost in the encrypted mail." A couple officers offered polite smiles, tight and professional. No one chuckled. Noah walked to the exit flanked by the MPs. He didn't resist, just tossed one last glance over his shoulder, as if expecting me to say something. I didn't. The door sealed behind him with a soft click, and just like that, the air reset. No one whispered. No one looked around. The silence wasn't awkward, it was discipline. I clicked to the next slide. If you'll look at the packet movement overlay, you'll see the foreign traffic mapping directly to U.S. mid-tier data centers. These aren't accidental signals. They're probing for protocol gaps. My voice stayed level, controlled. I hit every metric, mapped every attack vector, answered 3 senior-level questions on the fly, without a single misstep. It was muscle memory by now. When I handed off the final mitigation flowchart to the DIA rep, he nodded. Clean, tight, executable. That's what mattered in our world. Not apology, not drama, execution. The room dismissed with murmurs of approval, papers folded, chairs tucked. No one mentioned what happened. No one asked who he was. As Colonel Braddock passed my desk, he stopped just for a moment. Gave me a look that wasn't pity, wasn't sympathy. It was recognition. "Good work, Major," he said. Not Evelyn, not Reese. Major. That word didn't feel like a title that day. It felt like a line, a boundary between who I had been and who I refused to be any longer. When the room emptied, I sat for a long while, the projector still humming, the silence thick again, but this time it felt earned. I didn't check my phone, didn't open my inbox, didn't rehearse what I might say if anyone asked about Noah. Because no one did. They didn't have to. That room didn't remember me as a sister. They remembered the officer who held her ground and guarded the room. And after all those years of being the quiet one, the footnote, the background, they finally saw only me. The first message came 2 hours later. Short, clipped. From my mother. "Couldn't you have handled that privately?" No greeting, no context. Just a scolding disguised as concern, like I was a child who'd spilled juice on the wrong tablecloth. I didn't reply. I'd learned long ago that in our family, silence wasn't absence. It was a kind of weapon. My father wouldn't call. He never did when things got tense. But word still came, like always, through my aunt at Sunday dinner. "Your father says that was an overreaction. You don't embarrass family in front of outsiders." Outsiders. That's what they thought my commanding officers were. Not colleagues. Not soldiers I'd bled beside in war rooms and threat briefings. Just strangers to be managed around family pride. Noah, of course, took it public. A vague Facebook post appeared the next morning, no names needed. Funny how some folks forget where they came from once they get a little rank on their chest. Good luck briefing your conscience. 68 likes, 4 laughing reactions. A few comments from old high school friends. Facts, come on, bro. Don't let it get to you. I wasn't tagged, but I was in every word. Still, I didn't screenshot it, didn't rage type a response, didn't write a counter-narrative. Instead, I sat at my desk, the light from the monitor turning everything around me, clinical and blue. And I let the silence stretch. It wasn't pride. It was clarity. Because something else had happened too. In the middle of the flood of noise from my family and the digital whispers from Noah's old circle, there were other messages, quiet ones. Direct. From officers I barely knew and colleagues I'd only shared rooms with during intel rotations. "Wish I had your composure, ma'am." Textbook authority. Not easy to do with a brother in the room. Handled with more grace than I would have. Each one small, simple professional. But they pierced in a way my family's disapproval no longer could. Because those words weren't rooted in blood or guilt. They were rooted in respect. And that's what no one tells you about doing the right thing. Even when you don't flinch. Even when you follow the rules down to the punctuation. It still hurts. Not because you regret it, but because a part of you, no matter how hardened, how grown, still aches for the people who raised you to say you did the right thing. and instead, all you get is silence dressed up in judgment. But that day, I realized something quietly devastating. The people who respected me most had nothing to do with the people who raised me. And once you see that truth, you can't unsee it. You can only decide who you'll listen to from here on out. A week passed before Noah called. I was in the commissary parking lot, engine off, fingers still curled around the keys, when his name lit up my screen. I stared at it for a full 10 seconds before answering. His voice was low. No sarcasm, no punchline waiting to be delivered. Just wanted to let you know. They bumped me off the deployment roster. I didn't speak. They didn't say it was because of the skiff thing, he added quick. But I'm not stupid. Command said something about disciplinary ambiguity, whatever that means. The silence stretched. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for a fight. I don't blame you, he said quietly. Not anymore. That surprised me. I'd spent days rehearsing defenses I never used. I didn't report you, Noah, I said. I followed protocol. You weren't cleared. I did what anyone in my position would have done. He exhaled long and hollow. I didn't think it was that serious, he said. I mean, I knew I wasn't cleared, but I thought being on base meant I could just observe. Figured it was a gray area. There's no gray area in a skiff, I said. Not with classified payloads in the room. He didn't argue. That was new. Another pause, and then I saw your face that day. You weren't mad. You were done. I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel. The air in the car had shifted. I've been doing this work a long time, I said. Longer than you've ever really acknowledged. I know, he said. And for once he sounded like he meant it. We talked for 20 minutes. Not as siblings, not as rivals, as soldiers, equal footing, no jabs, no old roles. And when the call ended, something in me exhaled for the first time in years. Not relief, not forgiveness, just space. Enough to breathe. I visited home a month later. No ceremony, no announcement, just me, a weekend bag, and a quiet resolve. Dad asked one question over a beer on the back porch. You missed the real military, yet I didn't flinch. Didn't try to earn his approval. I just looked him in the eye and said, no, sir. I don't. He stared at me for a long second, then nodded just once. Not pride, not warmth, but recognition. That night I sat alone on the same porch where I used to dream of being seen, where I once begged the world silently to notice me. Now I didn't need to be noticed. I didn't need to be liked. I just needed to be true. And I already was. Some stories don't end with apologies. They end with boundaries earned in silence and held with strength. I wasn't the quiet one anymore. I was the one who stood still when it mattered most.